I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and it seems I'm one of the only people alive who will openly admit to liking Jurassic World.
Now, if you followed me for long enough, you know that I don't think Jurassic World surpasses the original Jurassic Park. The first movie is one of the greatest movies ever made, and it still holds up after all these years. That said, my assessment on Jurassic World is that it's the best of the sequels. Moreover, I feel that a lot of people misunderstand what this movie is really about.
Before we get too far in, I'd like to acknowledge that the movie does have legitimate flaws.
For example, there is some surprisingly bad CGI throughout the film. Not that all of the effects are bad, most of them are actually very good, but when they fail, they really fail. The film also has a sort of grayish tinge to it, making the footage feel a bit too cold and artificial for something that's meant to be warm and tropical. It also has the same issues that seem to plague a lot of films released in the past few years. The humor tends to be hit or miss, the sequel hooks can sort of break immersion, and yeah, the nostalgia is laid on really thick.
Those criticisms I understand. However, there are other criticisms which I don't think make much sense, and I would like to start by addressing one of my own.
Way back in 2015, when the movie premiered and I first reviewed it, I mentioned that I wasn't impressed with the character of Zach Mitchell, the older brother of Gray Mitchell. My original take was that his arc felt like it was missing a scene or two, since it seemed like he was a jerk until he wasn't anymore.
Having just watched the movie again for the purposes of this video, I now realize that I misunderstood what was going on with him.
Zach's problem is that he's a teenage boy, and like any teenage boy, he isn't the best at dealing with difficult stuff. The only time he gets truly mean in the film is when a tearful Gray hits him with the realization that their parents are contacting divorce lawyers, meaning the prospect of the family splitting is suddenly very real.
That scares him, so he responds harshly.
Even in that harshness, though, he isn't trying to be cruel. He's just failing not to be in the moment. But later, when the chips are down, his big brother instincts kick in and he steps up to the challenge. I didn't get that at first, but I do now.
But that's not even close to the greatest complaint leveled against this movie. The true master of them all is the accusation of misogyny, which has dogged this movie from the very beginning.
First up is the treatment of Claire Dearing, played by Bryce Dallas Howard.
This part of the argument goes as follows.
Claire is a successful businesswoman who, despite not being the owner, is essentially in charge of the park. Yet she keeps receiving unwanted advances from alpha male Archetypo and Grady, and since the movie appears to be on his side and presents him as right about everything else, the movie is clearly saying that Claire's life will only be fulfilled when she has a man in it.
This is then combined with a phone conversation Claire has with Karen, the mother of Zach and Gray.
During this phone call, Karen apparently pressures Claire into having children. So goes the argument anyway. All of this stuff combined is then interpreted by the film's critics as being anti-feminist, dare I say misogynist, because it's stating that all of Claire's success in a man's world counts for nothing until she falls into the traditional female role of having a husband and making babies with him. Claire needs to get out of the office and into the kitchen, if you will.
Now, if we take this argument at face value, we could point out that the original Jurassic Park did basically the same thing about a man.
Alan Grant, who is involved with Ellie Sattler at the time, and I will never forgive the third movie for breaking them up, begins the film openly resistant to the prospect of fatherhood since he claims to not like kids.
That's not how he was in the books, of course. No, but we're talking about the movie here.
Throughout the first half of that film, people are constantly forcing Grant to be in the presence of Tim and Lex, apparently as some kind of immersion therapy. However, he winds up having to take on the fatherly role by way of necessity after things go pear-shaped in the park, and not only does he turn out to be pretty good as a caretaker, but he also comes around to the idea of having kids of his own one day. Again, screw Jurassic Park 3 for not following through with that.
One could then argue that all Jurassic World does is take that same character arc and apply it to a woman instead of a man. Well, Leon Thomas of Renegade Cut did a video where he said that counter-argument doesn't work because pressuring a man into having kids is different than pressuring a woman into it. Interesting. Does he say why? Well, no, he just says that it is. Well, with such a compelling rebuttal as that, I suppose we can just end the video right here. Yeah, you didn't really think I was gonna let that go, did you?
Look, Leon is technically right in that there is a difference in terms of how men and women are expected to interact with their children, but that doesn't mean they are unequal. Historically, a woman was expected to stay home and provide such care as feeding and general nurturing, but the man was expected to provide by going out and protecting the family from danger. Both roles have been viewed by societies throughout the centuries as vital to a child's upbringing, and the abandonment of those roles by either sex was frowned upon.
However, we have been speaking as though this is an accurate assessment of Claire's story arc, but I'm not so sure it is.
What the criticism doesn't seem to get is that Claire doesn't have a healthy work-life balance.
Her introductory scene makes it very clear that she's not really a happy person.
She's incredibly stressed, only able to manage a fake smile when meeting with the investors. As the film continues, we see that her job running the park consumes her life to such an extent that she's neglecting her nephews. Bear in mind, she knew they were coming, yet she did not clear her schedule to be with them. Instead, she treats a family visit like another business obligation and sends one of her employees to fill in for her.
Man or woman, that's cold. And it gets even worse.
When everything goes wrong, as it must in these films, her nephews are literally the last thing she thinks about. Her focus is on every other aspect of containing the Indominus Rex, and the situation is already well out of hand before the kids even cross her mind.
Compare that to John Hammond in the first movie.
Thanks to how fast everything happens, the T-Rex has already escaped and caused damage, but back at the command center, they have no idea how bad things really are yet. Even as they're trying to figure out what's going on, Hammond still has enough presence of mind to ask Muldoon to find the kids. And of course, we already established earlier that he has a good connection with them.
Claire can't even remember how old Zach and Gray are. How that gets lost on people who think this movie hates women is beyond me. And what about that phone call with her sister? Well, how about we listen to what's actually said?
You'll see when you have kids. Yeah. When... it's worth it.
My word, someone tell that literal Karen to lay off. Not buying it, huh? Not for 2 cents and a McDonald's coupon. There is not a single word in there that's pressuring Claire to have children.
Claire just thinks it's unlikely to happen and is emotionally deflecting her disappointment, and Karen is providing emotional support. She isn't telling her to go and get pregnant that instant, she's just saying it could still happen one day.
Where's the pressuring? Where's the misogyny? I don't see it.
I would say that Claire's arc exists not because the filmmakers are opposed to women in management positions, but rather it's opposed to anyone being so caught up in their work that they forget to have personal lives and even lose touch with their own families. The pressure Claire feels is predominantly from her job, which occupies every aspect of her waking life. The people around her aren't pressuring her to stay home and make babies, they just think she needs some downtime with people she cares about, which necessitates having people in her life to care about.
This even explains Owen's behavior. Yes, he can be a little blunt with the euphemisms, but his relationship with her is clearly an unresolved one.
It can easily be surmised based on what we see that Claire is the one who retreated, since the only world she wants anything to do with is a business world. She does like Owen knows this and is trying to get through to her, but she's resisting for reasons already stated.
Ergo, I don't see any misogyny here either. But that's not the only thing people bring up when accusing this film of sexism. Oh no, there's one more event that people point to.
Remember the nanny assigned by Claire to watch over the boys? She gets the most over-the-top death in the whole movie, where she's carried off by a pteranodon, who is then eaten by a mosasaurus.
This is considered sexist because she didn't deserve to die in that way, or at all for that matter. She was just doing her job and was in the wrong place at the wrong time, so why did she deserve to die in such an over-the-top display?
Really? That's the argument? Have these people ever seen a Jurassic Park movie before?
That is a good question. If they had, you'd think they'd know that the Jurassic series is piled high with the bodies of people who didn't have it coming.
You think Mr. Arnold from the first movie had it coming? He wasn't one of the bad guys. How about Muldoon? He maybe had a bit of hubris thinking he could outsmart a raptor, but he's otherwise a good person. And that's before we get to The Lost World, which might have the highest body count of the whole series, and most of the victims are either innocents or people just doing their jobs.
That movie kills a family pet, people. The dog never deserves it.
Neither did this poor guy in Jurassic World, who was in tears before the Indominus got him. Weird how nobody got upset over his death.
But then again, that's the whole point of these movies, isn't it? When man oversteps his boundaries, things go wrong and innocent people get hurt and killed. It's the one theme that unifies all of these movies no matter what. This is just another example of it playing out.
Watching over the kids wasn't her responsibility. Heck, she's not even a nanny. She's just Claire's assistant who was given the task so her boss could shirk her responsibility, which puts her in a position where she gets killed.
Of course she didn't deserve it. The movie agrees with you on that.
You could also look at this death scene as the Jurassic saga breaking boundaries.
You see, all the deaths in the previous Jurassic movies are inflicted upon men. Jurassic World features the first female death. Well, first human female death. Let's not forget that all the dinosaurs are female, and they get killed in some pretty gruesome ways too.
And no, the little girl at the beginning of The Lost World doesn't count because she survives, and considering how quickly the incident is hand-waved away, she couldn't have been hurt that badly.
And you know what? Speaking as an actor myself, I can tell you that actors love getting to play a good death scene, especially one that will stick in people's minds.
This death scene is so crazy in execution that it remains the most memorable death in the whole film, and it was given to a woman. Isn't that kind of progressive in its own way? People aren't getting upset because she's a beloved character who didn't deserve to die. They're getting upset because she's a woman who dies on screen, and they think the only possible reason as to why that happened must be that the filmmakers hate women, so if they say that they hate this scene because they're not sexist, that gains them clout and puts them on the right side of history.
Sorry, but that's not how it works. Sexism has nothing to do with this scene. People get eaten by dinosaurs in Jurassic movies, and you should have known that going in. It's not just accusations of sexism that Jurassic World catches flack for, though. There's also the accusation of cynicism.
Jurassic World is sometimes called the cynical blockbuster by critics, something that thinks the audience isn't wowed by dinosaurs anymore, and which is perhaps ashamed of its own existence as just another reboot/sequel in a sea of reboots and sequels. That cynicism rubs a lot of people the wrong way, especially if they take it a step further and interpret the film as trying to tell the audience that they should be cynical as well.
I have never understood where this critique comes from. In fact, I've often wondered if the people who use this critique saw the same movie that I did.
Are you saying this movie isn't cynical at all?
Well, no, there is cynicism in Jurassic World, but I don't think cynicism is the point. The way I see it, Jurassic World is about the eternal struggle between cynicism and sincerity.
By this, I mean you have two opposing sides butting heads throughout the film like two pachycephalosaurs. On the one hand, you have the people who only see the park as a means to an end, whether that end is making money from an audience looking for more or exploiting the dinosaurs for purposes unrelated to the park. This would be the cynical side people zero in on.
Yet there is another side that gets ignored in the greater discussion.
This side has a genuine love for what the park is about, or a genuine respect for the dinosaurs as they are. That would be the side of sincerity. You may also note that I didn't categorize the two sides by in-context affiliation, because the two perspectives exist in various places, running from the guests to the corporate overlords and everyone in between.
As proof that these perspectives exist side by side, I turn to the movie itself. Cue the montage.
No one's impressed by a dinosaur anymore.
That first park was legit.
You made them and now you think you own them.
We do.
Jurassic World exists to remind us how very small we are. Cooler, I believe, is the word that you used in your memo.
They're dinosaurs, wow enough.
That is some pretty compelling evidence. How the heck did the critics not notice that? I don't know, Snazzy, but this particular thread does culminate in something that I expect to see on TV tropes at some point. I've mentioned it in the past, but I feel it's worth bringing up again. A little something I call the T-Rex moment.
From an allegorical standpoint, the dinosaurs in Jurassic World fit nicely into this theme of cynicism versus sincerity, specifically the two heavyweights. The Indominus Rex embodies the cynical side. She exists purely because the higher-ups believe dinosaurs aren't impressive anymore. They say audiences want bigger, meaner, and scarier. Then again, these are the same people who thought a tutorial video of Jimmy Fallon doing a bad slapstick routine was the funniest thing ever, even though we see that actual children aren't even amused by it.
Clearly, the higher-ups don't have much respect for the audience's intelligence, and based on this belief that consumers are so easily amused, the hybrid is commissioned.
Of course, there's also the ulterior motive for the Indominus Rex to be used in warfare, something totally contrary to what Jurassic Park was about in the first place. Her status as an artificially engineered monstrosity might also be a sly reference to the original ideas for Jurassic Park 4, which would have featured these things. Yeah, most of us aren't complaining that those never saw the light of day. Representing the side of sincerity, however, is the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Now, as I'm sure you know, the T-Rex has always been the major icon of the franchise.
A T-Rex skeleton has been in all but one of the logos, and the Rex itself has been prominently featured in all but one of the movies. You know the one exception. Even more than the Raptors, who are iconic in their own right, the T-Rex is the top dinosaur of Jurassic Park.
Jurassic World makes a point of keeping the T-Rex out of sight for most of the runtime.
We know she's there, but she remains unseen until the key moment.
In order to beat the Indominus, Claire takes it upon herself to release the T-Rex and bring her into the fray. And she makes her entrance like this. That moment right there is when the movie declares that sincerity will win the day.
Here she is, the symbol of the original film, making a glorious entrance to save the protagonists in similar manner to how she did back in 1993. This is what we in the audience wanted to see all along. We don't need mutations or some weird thing the producers think will thrill us. We just want the T-Rex, and she delivers. That, and we also get a Take That moment aimed at Jurassic Park 3 as she busts through a Spinosaurus skeleton.
It is quite the visual spectacle, of course, but it has subtext that lets us know what side this movie takes in the argument between cynicism and sincerity.
Aren't you forgetting something, Omni? What about the Raptors?
They're from the original movie too, and they're in Jurassic World for much longer than the T-Rex is. In fact, they have a much bigger impact on the plot.
If the T-Rex represents the sincerity of the first film and the I-Rex represents the corporate cynicism of the current movie, what do the Raptors represent? Good question. I suppose the Raptors could represent the audience.
The audience? Oh, this I gotta hear.
Okay, stick with me on this. The Raptors are considered dangerous wild cards, like they are every time they show up. But to fully understand what I'm getting at, we have to look at how they're viewed in this particular context by the human cast.
The people higher up in the company are shown to not really understand any of the dinosaurs in the park, but they see the Raptors specifically as exploitable. In particular, we have Vic Hoskins, who wants the Raptors to be incorporated into the military, for a price, of course. Thinking that the Raptors can be domesticated, he sees a prime opportunity to do some arms dealing. To him, this whole debacle with the Indominus is a field test to prove the theory of military dinosaurs. Then again, guys like Owen and Barry, who work with the Raptors directly, know that this plan is misguided. The Raptors are creatures that need to be respected and treated properly, and even then, they cannot really be controlled. All it would take is one slip-up and the Raptors would turn on their masters with righteous fury.
In some ways, you could see that as an allegory for how entertainers view their audience. Some see them as beings only meant to be exploited for profit, and some think they ought to be treated with respect. It's an exaggeration, sure, but it does kind of fit.
Of course, the Raptors are only briefly won over by the product of corporate cynicism, but when the chips are down, they ultimately reject it. Blue, the only Raptor left at the end, even returns to the battle fighting alongside the T-Rex, whom we've already established as standing for the sincerity of the original film. Ergo, that can be seen as the audience standing with the original Jurassic Park above all else.
So, does that make sense?
I suppose so. Anything else to say?
Well, not a whole lot else. So I guess I'll wrap this up.
As I said, I get that there is cynicism present in Jurassic World, but based on how the movie plays out, I don't believe that it is properly cynical.
As I see it, this is a movie all about the battle between corporate cynicism and artistic sincerity.
Now, you could potentially say that the approach taken with this theme makes Jurassic World too meta for its own good, and perhaps there is a discussion to be had there. After all, going meta with a sequel/reboot is a tricky thing to pull off, and sometimes it can be a sign of the storytellers thinking they're just oh so clever.
But whether it's too meta or just meta enough, I don't think it's cynical, nor do I think it's sexist. I actually think it's the opposite of both those things. But maybe that's just me. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Okay, now on to talking about Fallen Kingdom. That's going to be a pretty tricky one.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.